The first letter she ever wrote him was on the back of a torn grocery receipt. Mira didn't have fancy stationery or pens that worked right. Just whatever scraps she could find in the corners of the dusty little house she shared with her grandmother. The town they lived in was the kind that never made the map, sun-scorched, quiet, where time moved like molasses and people learned early how to survive with less. Mira had grown up with cracked heels, calloused hands, and eyes that saw more than any child should. Her father had been gone before she could remember. Her mother passed away when she was 10, and since then, it had just been her and Nanny, surviving on little more than prayers and boiled rice. The letters weren't meant to go anywhere important. At least, not at first. They were a school project, organized by a local teacher who asked each student to write something kind to soldiers stationed overseas. Most kids wrote a sentence or two, just enough to check the box. But Mira, she wrote with her heart. She poured herself into that first letter, telling stories of her life, her village, the jasmine tree that bloomed only in May, and how she wished she had a friend who wouldn't disappear like the others had. She didn't expect a response, but she kept writing anyway, every week, long after the project ended. She never knew where the letters went. She didn't have a real address to give in return, only the tiny school's mailbox. But someone out there was reading them. She felt it. Her words were too heavy, too full of truth to vanish into nothing. And then one day, a letter came back, neatly folded. No name, just a military postmark and handwriting that looked strong, deliberate. He wrote about the deserts he patrolled, about missing home, about the silence between gunfire. He didn't say much, but what he did say, Mira read it over and over again until the paper thinned at the edges. His name was Arif, and from that moment on, he was real. They began exchanging letters every month. She wrote by candlelight, using ink that bled through paper. He wrote from foxholes, from barracks, sometimes in the margins of ration receipts. He never sent photos. She didn't ask for any. What they shared didn't need faces, it lived in language, in hope, in the small, flickering space between their very different worlds. She told him when her nanny got sick. He told her when a friend didn't make it home. She confessed that sometimes she stood by the edge of the village road, imagining the world beyond. He admitted that the only thing keeping him sane some nights was the thought of a jasmine tree blooming in a place he'd never been. Years passed. Mira grew into a quiet woman with dreams folded into drawers and calluses that never softened. The village changed little. Her life, even less. Nanny's health faded, and with it, Mira's time to dream. But the letters never stopped. Not once. Each month, another envelope. Another piece of a man she had never met but knew deeper than anyone else. She didn't tell the villagers. Some things were too sacred for gossip. And then, one day, they stopped. No warning. No goodbye. Just silence. She waited for weeks. Months. Still nothing. She wrote more letters anyway, sending them into the void. Maybe he had returned home. Maybe he had forgotten. Or maybe the worst had happened, something she couldn't bring herself to say aloud. She held on to the last letter he had sent, sleeping with it under her pillow, whispering his name into the stillness. It became the ache she carried in everything, feeding Nanny, washing clothes, watching the seasons roll past the same dirt road. The jasmine tree bloomed again. She sat under it one afternoon, watching the petals drift to the ground like snow. Her fingers gripped the edge of a new letter she had written but not mailed. What was the point? The world had taken so much already. It didn't seem fair to keep hoping. And then, from the corner of her eye, she saw someone standing at the edge of the field. He wore a plain shirt, dusty boots. His hair was shorter than she imagined, his face older, worn. But the moment their eyes met, something inside her cracked wide open. She dropped the letter. He took a step forward. At first, Mira didn't move. Her body wouldn't let her. It was as if every second of the last few years, every letter, every silence, every heartbeat spent wondering, had suddenly collapsed into this one impossible moment. Arif stood there, motionless but real, the wind pulling gently at his sleeves, the sun casting a golden line down the slope of his shoulder. She stared at him like a ghost had appeared, like her imagination had somehow bled into reality. But he didn't vanish. He took another step, then another, and with each one, Mira felt the space between them thinning like the pages of their letters, soft, delicate, sacred. He stopped just a few feet away. No words yet. Just eyes meeting eyes. In his, she saw something she already knew, a weight carried too long, the ache of wanting something you're too scared to claim. But beneath it, There was warmth, recognition, a silent confession she'd already read between the lines of 100 folded pages. He reached into the pocket of his coat and pulled out something wrapped in a cloth. Slowly, gently, he knelt, right there under the blooming jasmine tree, where she had once told him in a letter, "If you ever visit, this is where you'll find me. This is where I feel closest to the world I wish I lived in." When he unwrapped the cloth, it revealed a small wooden box. Not polished, not perfect. Hand-carved, likely by him, the edges uneven, the grain still rough. But inside, nestled against a faded scrap of ribbon, was a ring. Simple, honest, real, like the man who now knelt before her. Mira brought a hand to her mouth, unsure whether to laugh or cry or run. But her feet held still. He finally spoke, his voice lower than she'd imagined but steady, like he'd been rehearsing every syllable for years. "You were the only thing that ever felt safe. Every word you wrote, every letter, you saved me." His eyes flickered with something heavy. "I stopped writing because I was scared I'd come home broken, that I wouldn't be enough. But I couldn't stay away anymore." The wind rustled the jasmine branches above them. Mira stepped forward, kneeling too now, her knees pressing into the soft earth. She reached for the box, not to take the ring, but to hold his hands. They were calloused, rough with work and war, but when they wrapped around hers, they felt like coming home. No more words passed between them. None were needed. Everything that mattered had already been said in years of ink and paper, in pages that had crossed oceans to find each other. They sat beneath the tree until the light began to fade, their fingers interlocked, their hearts finally breathing in rhythm. That night, the village stirred with curiosity. No one had seen a stranger in years. And yet, there he was, eating beside Mira and Nanny, his laughter soft, his eyes never straying far from hers. When they walked through the market the next day, people stared. Some whispered, but Mira held her head high. For once in her life, she wasn't apologizing for what she loved. Arif stayed. At first, just for a week. Then a month. He helped mend the roof of the school, taught the children how to plant a new garden, shared stories around the fire at night, always careful not to linger too long on the parts that still woke him in sweat. Mira never pushed. She just sat beside him, offering silence when words became too heavy. In her presence, he healed, slowly, layer by layer. And as he did, she bloomed. No longer just the poor village girl with forgotten dreams, but a woman finally seen. They didn't rush into anything. Love like theirs didn't demand it. It had waited this long. It could wait longer. But one morning, as they prepared rice and peeled mangoes for Nanny's breakfast, Mira looked at him with that familiar softness in her eyes and said quietly, "I never wanted riches. I only wanted someone who stayed." Arif reached into his pocket, pulled out the same box, and held it open once more, not with a question this time, but with quiet certainty. She didn't answer with words. She just slipped the ring onto her own finger, kissed his palm, and smiled. The jasmine tree bloomed again that year, brighter than ever. The wedding was nothing like the ones Mira had seen in glossy magazines left behind by travelers. There were no glass halls or chandeliers, no diamond-covered veils or orchestras. Instead, it was held under the jasmine tree, in the same spot where Arif had once knelt with shaking hands and a wooden box carved from longing. The entire village gathered. Neighbors, children, women who had known Mira since she was a child running barefoot through the fields. They wore bright colors, strung garlands between trees, and sang songs that echoed across the hills. There were no chairs, just blankets spread out under the sun and laughter that wrapped around everyone like music. Mira wore a simple dress, made by hand, stitched with threads borrowed from neighbors. Her hair was adorned with jasmine blossoms, their fragrance soft and familiar. Arif stood waiting, not in a suit or uniform, but in a white kurta gifted by her nanny, the sleeves slightly too short, the collar imperfect, but perfect for the day. As Mira walked toward him, her bare feet pressing into the earth she'd known all her life, she saw not the soldier who had left the world behind, but the boy she'd once written letters to, the man who had returned, not with promises, but with presence. The ceremony was brief, spoken in soft words and knowing looks. There was no need for grand declarations. Their love had already been written across years, across oceans, across pages stained with candle wax and fingerprints. When they exchanged vows, they didn't recite poetry. Instead, Arif handed her a folded letter, one he had never sent, dated 2 years back. It read only, "If I ever make it home, I hope you're still waiting beneath the jasmine tree." Mira didn't cry. She smiled. Because he had made it. And she had waited. Without even realizing it, she had waited. Life didn't change overnight. The house still creaked in the rain. The village still struggled during dry spells. But there was something different in the way the days passed. Arav built a bench beneath the jasmine tree. It became their evening ritual, sitting side by side as the sun dipped behind the hills, their fingers intertwined, watching the children play and the sky shift to violet. He carved stories into wood, taught village boys how to fix old tools, and started writing again. Not letters, but short stories about loss, about hope, about a girl who saved a soldier with her words. Mira opened a small library inside the school, filled with donated books and her own handmade notebooks. She taught the younger girls how to write, how to find power in their stories, even if no one else ever read them. And in the afternoons, when the world was quiet, she would read Arav's stories out loud while he painted beside her. Their home was small, but filled with light. Not the kind that flickered from bulbs or chandeliers, but the kind that lived in soft glances, quiet laughter, and the sound of tea being poured into clay cups at dawn. Years passed. Seasons turned. And every time the jasmine bloomed, they celebrated, not with cakes or candles, but with silence and gratitude. For another year of presence. For another year of love that didn't need to prove itself. Their daughter was born in spring, her eyes dark like Myra's, her spirit strong like Arav's. They named her Sara, meaning story, because that's what she was, the living proof of a tale that began with a girl, a soldier, and a letter sent without expecting anything in return. Sometimes visitors still came to the village, wandering in from cities, searching for stories that felt real. They'd hear whispers of a girl who once wrote letters to a stranger and how he came back with more than just words. Some would ask to see the jasmine tree. Others would look at Arav and ask, "Is it true?" And he would only smile and say, "She saved me long before I could ever come home." And on quiet nights, Mira would still sit by the window, writing letters, not to send, not to be read, but just because that's how it all began. Her handwriting had changed. Her world had changed. But her heart was the same. Because love, when it's real, doesn't need to arrive on time. It doesn't need wealth or perfection. It just needs two hearts willing to believe in the impossible and wait long enough for the impossible to arrive.